One brutal shove, and an 84-year-old combat engineer who had survived 3 wars collapsed onto the sidewalk. The small music box in his pocket, a gift for his granddaughter, shattered into silent pieces. The bikers laughed. The street looked away. But what they all failed to understand was that this quiet old man wasn't just a veteran. He was a promise between soldiers that you are never, ever left behind. And in less than 30 minutes, the men who honored that promise were coming to collect. His name was Arthur Jenkins, but his friends, the ones who were still around, called him Art. At 84, every movement was a negotiation with gravity. His hands, gnarled with arthritis, were the same hands that had once set charges with the precision of a surgeon and laid steel beams for pontoon bridges under the cloak of darkness. He was a sapper, a combat engineer, a man whose job was to build and to break, to clear the way for others. Now, the way was a simple stretch of sidewalk in a town that had long since paved over its memories. His mission today was not strategic, but sacred. In one pocket, he carried a birthday card for his granddaughter Sarah, a new cadet at West Point. In the other, nestled in a small, padded box, was his real prize, a 19th-century music box he'd just gotten repaired. It had belonged to his wife, and its delicate melody was a direct line to a past filled with a love that still anchored him. Across the street, the Serpents of Odin Motorcycle Club had colonized the sidewalk in front of their favorite bar. They were a modern breed of Viking, draped in leather and fueled by a cheap, loud bravado. Their leader, a mountain of a man named Spike, surveyed his domain with the bored arrogance of a king who had never fought for his crown. He saw Art shuffling past, a relic from a forgotten time, and saw nothing of value. Art, focused on his mission, simply tried to pass. The sleeve of his old M65 jacket, a ghost from a past campaign, grazed a chrome handlebar. The contact was featherlight. The bike didn't even wobble. But for Spike, it was a trespass. It was a challenge to his authority, a disruption in his world of polished steel and casual menace. He stepped in front of Art, blocking his path. "Watch it, Grandpa," he growled, the words a cloud of vapor in the cold. Art looked up, his eyes clear and calm. "Excuse me, son. Didn't see it." He made to step around. It was the wrong move. To Spike, this quiet dignity was a form of defiance. He shoved Art hard in the chest. It was a casual, thoughtless act of power. For Art, it was a catastrophic failure of balance. His world tilted, the cane slipping from his grasp. He fell backward, his hip hitting the concrete with a dull, heavy thud. The precious box flew from his pocket, landing with a sound that broke Art's heart, a splintering of wood and the faint, dying tinkle of a broken promise. The laughter from the bikers was immediate and cruel. It was the sound of jackals who had just seen a lion stumble. A young woman walking by averted her eyes and picked up her pace. A businessman paused, adjusted his tie, and continued on his way. In the coffee shop, the barista who had just sold Art a cup of coffee minutes earlier turned back to wipe the counter. An entire street of people saw an old man on the ground, and every single one of them chose to be somewhere else. The silence of their indifference was more deafening than the bikers' laughter. Humiliation burned hotter than any physical pain. Art didn't look at his attackers. His gaze was fixed on the wreckage of the music box. He saw Sarah's face, her excitement at receiving her grandmother's gift. He saw his wife's smile, all of it shattered on a dirty sidewalk. With a groan that seemed to carry the weight of decades, he pushed himself onto his hands and knees. His fingers, which once knew the intricate mechanics of explosives, now trembled as they tried to gather the tiny, useless pieces of metal and wood. He picked up the soiled birthday card, its cheerful message now a mockery. He used a parking meter to pull himself up, his body screaming in protest. He retrieved his cane and limped to the cold metal of a bus bench. He didn't wipe the trickle of blood from his lip. He sat, not in defeat, but in a kind of focused stillness. The bikers watched him, expecting tears or curses. They got neither. They got something far more unsettling: silence. Art reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, beat-up flip phone. He didn't check for a signal. He didn't scroll through contacts. His thumb went to a single, worn button. A button he hadn't pressed in over a decade. The contact simply read, "Castle." He held it down. 1, 2, 3 seconds. A small red light on the phone blinked once. He closed the phone, slipped it back into his pocket, and folded his hands over his cane. His breathing was even. His eyes were clear. He sat there, a statue of patience, because he knew something the bikers and the indifferent crowd didn't. He knew that a promise had been invoked, a code had been triggered, and he knew that out there, in the cold, clear sky, the thunder was beginning to gather. For 20 minutes, Arthur Jenkins did not move. He remained on the bench, a sentinel of stillness amidst the casual cruelty of the world. The bikers, their moment of cheap victory savored, had returned to their orbit of loud jokes and self-congratulation. Spike, the architect of the insult, occasionally glanced over at Art, a sneer playing on his lips. He saw a defeated old man, a non-entity, a piece of street furniture. He saw what he wanted to see. He had no idea that Art's stillness wasn't born of defeat, but of absolute, unshakable certainty. He wasn't waiting in hope. He was waiting for an inevitability he himself had set in motion. His mind wasn't on the cold bench or the throbbing in his hip. It was 7,000 miles and 70 years away, on the frozen banks of the Imjin River. He was 21, and his fingers were so numb he could barely feel the cold steel of the wrenches. Mortar shells were walking their way across the ice, each explosion a flash of angry orange in the pre-dawn gloom. They had to get the bridge across before sunrise, or the entire company would be cut off and annihilated. A young West Point lieutenant named David Miller, fresh-faced and terrified, but hiding it behind a mask of command, was screaming orders over the din. 2 of their men, just kids from Ohio and Texas, were trapped on the far side, pinned down by a machine gun nest. The captain on the radio had called them an acceptable loss. Art remembered the silence that followed that pronouncement, a silence more terrifying than the explosions. Then he heard Miller's voice, clear and hard as frozen steel, cut through the static. "There is no such thing as an acceptable loss, Command. We have brothers. We are going back." And they had. Miller, Art, and 3 other sappers. A desperate charge across a half-finished bridge. A symphony of suppressive fire and raw courage. They got the boys out. They got them all out. That young lieutenant was now General David Miller. He was the man Art's daughter had married. He was Castle. And Art knew, with a certainty that was etched into his soul, that General Miller still believed there was no such thing as an acceptable loss. It started as a tremor in the concrete, a deep thrumming that was felt more than heard. It was a lie to the senses, a vibration that didn't belong in the quiet rhythm of a Tuesday morning. The bikers paused their laughter, looking around. "Truck?" one asked. Spike squinted down the road. "Nah, engine's wrong." The sound grew, thickening from a hum into a heavy, percussive pulse that rattled the plate glass window of the Serpent's den. It was a sound that belonged in newsreels from foreign wars, a sound that promised overwhelming force. Whump, 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 whump. Every head on the street snapped upward. There, clearing the roof of the First National Bank, was the source. A UH-60 Black Hawk, its black paint absorbing the morning light, descended not like a vehicle but like a bird of prey. It didn't hover. It owned the air it displaced. With a practiced, terrifying grace, it flared and settled into the adjacent empty lot, its rotor wash a hurricane of dust and discarded wrappers that blasted the street, forcing the bikers to shield their eyes. The sheer, audacious presence of it was a statement. As it touched down, a black Suburban with tinted windows materialized from the opposite direction, braking hard without a screech. The doors opened in a single coordinated motion. 6 men spilled out, moving with the unnerving, fluid precision of apex predators. They established a silent perimeter, their calm expressions and economic movements more intimidating than any overt threat. Then, from the open door of the helicopter, General David Miller emerged. He wore a simple flight suit, but walked as if he were in full-dress uniform. The 3 stars on his collar caught the sun. He walked through the perimeter his men had created, his gaze locked on the old man on the bench. He didn't so much as glance at the bikers. To him, they were irrelevant, a piece of terrain to be navigated. He knelt on the gritty pavement in front of Arthur Jenkins. It wasn't the gesture of a subordinate, but of a son. A gesture of profound, unbreakable respect. "Art," the general said, his voice level. "I got the call." He gently brushed a smudge of dirt from Art's cheek. Art looked at his son-in-law, a lifetime of shared understanding passing between them in a single look. "Knew you would, David." That was when Spike's world finally dissolved. The smirk, the bravado, the entire flimsy scaffolding of his identity collapsed. He had thought he was a serpent, a predator. He now realized he was just a mouse that had tried to bite a dragon. The general stood up, turning his full attention to Spike for the first time. His eyes were not hot with anger. They were cold with something far worse: disappointment. "That man you pushed," the general said, his voice cutting through the rotor wash. "He spent 3 decades building things in places where people like you were trying to tear them down. He built the bridges that carried the tanks that defended the freedoms you take for granted every single day. He did his duty. I'm here to do mine." He gave a curt nod to one of his men. A call was made. Minutes later, a local police cruiser arrived, its lights off. The officers inside looked nervous, as if they knew they were stepping into the final act of a play they didn't write. The general simply pointed at Spike. There was no argument. There was no resistance. The click of the handcuffs was the final quiet punctuation mark on a morning of loud disrespect. The immediate threat was gone, the bully vanquished. But the Black Hawk still sat in the lot, its blades slowly spinning down. A dark, silent promise. And in the vacuum left by the bikers' noise, a new sound was rising. The sound of a community, shocked into silence, finally waking up. What happens when the cowards who stood by and watched are finally forced to find their courage? As the police cruiser carrying Spike turned the corner and vanished, a profound and heavy silence descended upon the street. A silence made heavier by the slow, departing whump of the Black Hawk's blades climbing into the sky. The spectacle was over. The thunder had faded. And in its wake, the residents of Oak Valley were left with nothing but the ugly reflection of their own inaction. They stood in small, awkward clusters, the phones that had so eagerly recorded the drama now hanging limply in their hands. They had filmed an event, but they had failed to be a part of it. They were witnesses, not neighbors. The first crack in that wall of collective shame came from a woman with flour on her apron who stepped out from the bakery. She walked hesitantly toward Art, who was now being helped to his feet by one of his son-in-law's men. The woman held out a clean, white handkerchief. "Sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes fixed on the ground. "For your lip. I should have called for help. I'm sorry." Art took it with a gentle nod, the first acknowledgement that he was once again visible. Her small act of courage seemed to grant permission to others. An elderly man in a faded Marine's cap, who had been watching from his porch, slowly stood up, straightened his back with military stiffness, and rendered a sharp, perfect salute. It was a silent, public admission of a duty neglected and now, belatedly, fulfilled. This was the scene Maria Sanchez walked into. A young reporter for the town's digital newspaper, she had arrived just in time to see the arrest, her reporter's instincts buzzing. But unlike the national news crews who would soon descend for a quick, sensational soundbite, Maria saw the real story. It wasn't in the helicopter or the dramatic takedown. It was in the quiet dignity of the old man now sitting on the bench, and in the faces of a town grappling with a sudden, unwelcome moment of self-awareness. She decided to ignore the spectacle and investigate the man. Her first stop was Art's quiet, tree-lined street. She found a community that knew Arthur Jenkins not as a war hero, but as a quiet fixture of profound decency. She spoke to Mrs. Gable, a widow in her 90s, who told her through tears how Art had spent 2 days in her damp, cold basement one January, meticulously repairing a furnace the professionals had quoted her thousands to replace. His only payment was a cup of coffee and a slice of her apple pie. "He doesn't talk much," Mrs. Gable said, "but he notices when people are cold, and he knows how to bring the warmth back." Next, Maria went to the local VFW post, a small, unassuming building on the edge of town. There, she found a group of gruff, older men playing cards. At the mention of Art Jenkins, the card game stopped. A wiry old sailor who had served on a destroyer in the Atlantic looked up from his hand. "Art? You want to know about Art? Let me tell you. 3 years ago, the county cut the shuttle service to the VA hospital. A lot of us old guys, we couldn't get to our doctors." Art didn't complain. He didn't write a letter to the editor. He took his pension money, bought a used passenger van, and organized the rest of us into a volunteer driver corps. He drives the Tuesday morning shift himself. Never missed one. The sailor leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Art, don't talk about the bridges he built over there. He just keeps building them over here." Maria wrote her story. She didn't lead with the biker or the helicopter. She led with a 92-year-old widow's furnace. She wrote about the van and the quiet drives to the VA hospital. She wrote about the music box, now broken, and the West Point cadet, who would never hear its song. She titled the piece, "The Quiet Bridge Builder of Oak Valley," and she embedded her unedited video at the very end. The story exploded. It gave the viral clip a heart and a history. The national narrative shifted. This was no longer just a satisfying story of a bully getting his comeuppance. It was a story about a lifetime of quiet, uncelebrated service. It was about the fabric of a community, held together by threads of decency woven by men like Arthur Jenkins. The town's social media pages, which had been filled with angry condemnation of the bikers, were now flooded with something else: stories. People began sharing their own Art Jenkins encounters. Small acts of kindness, a helping hand, a quiet word of encouragement from years ago. The incident had held up a mirror, and now the town was finally starting to recognize the best version of itself. The mayor, reading the room and perhaps his own conscience, called an emergency council meeting. The annual Founders' Day celebration was scheduled for the following week. It was usually a bland affair of hot dogs and uninspired speeches. A council member stood and read from Maria's article. When he finished, the room was silent. The vote was unanimous. This year, it would be Oak Valley Honor Day. They would celebrate their founding by celebrating the man who embodied its best principles. The town was preparing to honor a hero, to wash away its shame with a flood of public gratitude. But as the plans were being made, Arthur Jenkins knew that the only way to truly fix a broken world wasn't just to celebrate the righteous, but to find a way to mend the broken. And that meant he had one more bridge to build, the most difficult one of all. While the town of Oak Valley was busy planning a celebration, Arthur Jenkins was focused on a different kind of construction. Honor Day was being organized with bunting, speeches, and a stage on the town green. It was a public act of atonement, a town trying to praise its way out of the shame of its own silence. Art understood the impulse, but he knew that public praise could not heal a private wound. Not his, and certainly not the one festering inside the young man who had put him on the ground. Through his son-in-law, Art made a request that baffled the district attorney. He wanted to meet with Kyle Mueller, the man they called Spike, before the final sentencing. No cameras, no lawyers, just two men in a quiet room. They met in a small, featureless conference room at the courthouse. The air was thick with unspoken words. Kyle sat hunched over, his large hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table. He looked like a man bracing for a final devastating blow. Art entered slowly, his cane tapping a steady, calm rhythm on the linoleum floor. He didn't sit immediately. He just stood there, his presence filling the room with a quiet, immense gravity. Finally, Kyle spoke, his voice rough and low. "I'm sorry. The judge is gonna make me say it, but I'm saying it now, for what it's worth." Art pulled out a chair and sat down, his eyes never leaving Kyle's face. "Sorry for what, son? For the shove? For the broken music box? Or for not seeing me?" The question hit Kyle like a physical blow. His head snapped up, his eyes filled with a storm of confusion and pain. "My old man," he stammered, the words spilling out as if a dam had broken. "He was a Marine, came back from Vietnam in '72, but he never came all the way back. He was just this angry ghost in the house. He'd sit there staring at the wall, and if you made a noise, he'd yell. He hated the world. I grew up hating that uniform he kept in his closet. I thought it was the uniform that broke him. That day, when I saw you in that old jacket, all I saw was that ghost. And I hated you for it." The confession hung in the air, raw and painful. Here was the source of the poison. Not simple malice, but a generational wound, an anger passed down from a father who couldn't explain his pain to a son who couldn't understand it. Art listened, his expression softening, not with pity, but with a deep, profound understanding. "I knew 100 men like your father," Art said quietly. "They gave this country everything, and when they came home, they were handed a world that didn't want to hear about it. They were told to forget. But a man can't forget where he's bled. The anger you saw, that was his pain wearing a mask. The uniform didn't break him, son. Being left behind after the war was over, that's what broke him." Art leaned forward, his gnarled hands resting on his cane. "You and I, we're not so different. We're both builders. I built bridges with steel and sweat. You've just spent your life building a wall around your heart with anger. The question is, what do you want to build now?" He slid a small folded flyer across the table. It was for a local program that needed volunteer mechanics. Respect isn't a trophy you win. It's a structure you build, one piece at a time. This is your chance to pick up a tool. That conversation was the first piece of a new foundation for Kyle Mueller. His community service became a mission. He sold his prized motorcycle, the symbol of his old identity. With the money and with the help of the few friends who saw the change in him, he started a small, grassroots nonprofit. He called it Wheels for Vets. Twice a week, they set up a mobile garage at the VFW post, offering free oil changes, tire rotations, and basic vehicle repairs to elderly and disabled veterans. It was hard, greasy, thankless work. It was an apology made of torque wrenches and motor oil. It was him finally learning how to build. On Honor Day, the sun was bright, the mood celebratory. Maria Sanchez, the young reporter, stood on stage and told the story not just of art, but of the other quiet heroes she had found, giving faces and names to the town's unseen pillars. When it was Art's turn, he stood slowly, and the crowd rose to its feet in a long, rolling wave of applause. He didn't speak of war or heroism. He spoke about his wife and about being a good neighbor. He spoke about seeing the person behind the uniform, behind the wrinkles, behind the anger. From the back of the crowd, Kyle Mueller, wearing a simple work shirt with a smudge of grease on the sleeve, was helping a frail veteran in a wheelchair get a better view. Across the sea of faces, his eyes met Art's. No words were exchanged. None were needed. A silent, steady nod passed between them. A bridge had been built. So what is the story of Arthur Jenkins truly about? It is a testament to a fundamental truth. A man's worth is not measured by the noise he makes, but by the integrity he maintains in silence. It is the story of a single righteous act of loyalty echoing with the force of a thunderclap, waking a sleeping town and reminding it of the debt of honor it owes to its guardians. Art's journey from invisible man to symbol of dignity, and Kyle's journey from angry aggressor to man of service, prove that the most powerful force on earth is not hate or violence, but the unbreakable code that says, "We do not leave our people behind." This story isn't just something to be watched. It's a mirror. Many of you watching right now are the bridge builders. You are the quiet pillars of your families and communities. The lesson here is not simply to thank a veteran. It is to recognize the sapper in yourself and to keep building. Build a bridge between the past and the future by sharing your own stories of service and sacrifice. Build a bridge between a soldier's experience and a civilian's understanding by asking questions and truly listening. Build a bridge over the chasm of indifference by being the one who steps forward when others look away. That is how we practice honor. That is how we ensure the quiet heroes are never again invisible. Stories like this are the girders and beams that support the soul of our nation. If you believe in this mission, if you believe these stories must be told, help us build this platform. Subscribe to NX Incredible Stories and become part of the community dedicated to keeping the flame of valor burning bright.